Hello there, and welcome back to Fiction Hack, the podcast where we attempt to enhance our understanding of the modern story. My name's Colin Monroe, and this is
Ross Lawhead.
So a couple of weeks ago, we talked about Doctor Who, and we covered the first two Doctors, William Hartnell and Patrick Troughton. Obviously, there's been lots of Doctors, and we are working our way through them, but not every week. But this is going to be part two. So
This will be part two, and we're trying not to make it too onerous for everybody. But for people who don't really know what the early episodes are, maybe they've only seen the David Tennant, Matt Smith ones. Maybe they were a bit confused by the Peter Capaldi, why it wasn't as good as it could be. This will probably help people just get a little bit more of a grounding in just the character. I mean, okay, so like the main thing to know that.
Well, that's exactly me. I only really. I mean, I was aware of it back in the, when I was a kid and things, but I was never really into it until sort of David Tennant or Christopher Eccleston. So.
Most people didn't even come on board with them, and in the US, Matt Smith was kind of the breakthrough for the US market. I understand, although I think people went back and looked at the Tennant ones because those were generally better realized, let's say. Yeah. But so I mean, the main points to carry on from the last episode is that it's important to note that although there are a lot of different actors of Doctor Who, they are all the same character. And he's referred to just as the Doctor. That's kind of basics, which again, I didn't even know. Because, people like us, you and I, our generation, this was our dad's TV show, This is kind of what our parents did. And then it kind of got not so great, and then they stopped making it for a while. And then they tried to bring it back, which is going to be a fun little episode to talk about. And then it hit kind of in a big way in the revival, kind of mid-2000s.
I think the big thing to take away from the last episode or the Doctor Who Part 1 was that back then television was a whole different thing. It was made more like television was a new invention, and TV was sort of made more like radio because that's what they were used to. And the whole thing about episodes being recorded live, and that's all just completely alien these days, or virtually. There are some shows that do it as a special thing, but back then it was the norm.
I think it's vital to understand that to kind of to watch and enjoy those, kind of going in to have that knowledge allows you to appreciate it on a different level. What we're going to talk about now is interesting because we're looking at technology developing to the point where the creators of the shows, all the shows, were afforded a little bit more creative freedom in what they could show on screen, so that generally, I think most things were still recorded for a drama series, and then edited together in a way that we would kind of recognize today. I mean, you and I, we went to film school, but even people who watch TV now have a basic understanding that, the actors don't physically have to go across the film set to film the next part, in those few seconds in real time, which is what they had to do back then. So we've also got with let's just dive in. So we covered up until the end of the second Doctor's tenure, which was around about 1969. That was Patrick Troughton. Who we got next was John Pertwee, who's father of actor Sean Pertwee. Who isn't he in Gotham? Sean Pertwee, I think he's Alfred, but he's also in Dog Soldiers, which I kind of like. John Pertwee. He was the first Doctor to appear in color. At the start of his seasons, I think we'd probably be up to like season 7 or 8 or something like that. They switched over to color. There was not really a transition between the actors like there was between the first and the second one. So we didn't get any kind of regeneration. We just saw the Doctor actually get thrown into a vortex at the end of the second Doctor's storyline, the War Games. He went for trial with the other Time Lords. They threw him into prison essentially, and then wiped the memories of his companions and sent them back to where they were supposed to be.
So is there is there a gap in time between second and third?
There is. Yeah, it's not a large gap, and it's not one I think the creators of the shows have been kind of eager to go back and fill. I think because there were a bunch of conceptual shifts at the start of the Third Doctor's stories, which are not so great, quite frankly. It kind of made sense from a production point of view, but not from a story point of view. And I'm sure that cost considerations were a big deal. They wanted to use the kind of new technology, new way of editing a show, but they didn't really want to pay for all the sets and the set designers that they had been doing in the past. So what we got were a bunch of stories that were basically earthbound, and they justified that in the first story, the Spearhead from Space story, as saying, well, okay, we forced a regeneration of the Doctor. We're putting him on Earth just as a way of a kind of prison. He can't travel in space, and he can't travel in time. So they basically just kind of neuter his TARDIS and say, well, here's Earth, this is what you've got. How
do they justify that plot-wise?
Well, no, this was his punishment. Oh. No, this was his punishment from the previous series. So there's a Time Lord that appears to the Doctor. He walks through this mist, and he's got like a bowler hat and an umbrella and stuff. And it's like, I'm a Time Lord. We're punishing you. You've got to stay on Earth, and you can't time travel until we say so.
Right.
And so the Doctor throughout that is always trying to, he's got his TARDIS, but it's just the console in a garage, basically, a garage. And he's, trying to get it to go back in time. He's trying to do this, trying to do that. It works or it doesn't work, which, is consistent with still today. But yeah, he's very limited. And so from a production point of view, that means, well, you just use kind of modern day sets, costumes, again, modern day. You don't have to kind of build all this stuff. They did make use of kind of exterior locations, especially in that first story, because they were shooting on film. I think the entire first story, Spearhead from Space, was shot on film, and we talked about that I think last time. They're saying that in some of these early British TV shows, it's still quite jarring to go from what would be what we now call a kind of digital scan line of mechanical scan line, essentially, of these sort of television cameras to
and back then it was the other way around. Like an actual television camera was like the size of a house, well, maybe not a house, but a van. So it was easier because film cameras back then were more compact than the television counterparts.
But there are still problems, and it would slow down. The reason that they used television, even though it was a harder tool to use back then for those early episodes, is that for a time thing, in the same sense that everything was shot live, you had all this studio, you had all this equipment anyway. Just go ahead and use it. Shoot it live, get it out there. What they would have had to do for this next episode, and this shows a kind of shift in just kind of production and budgetary considerations, is that, well, we'll shoot it on film, which again has to be developed. That takes days sometimes. It has to be edited and gone through and all that kind of stuff. So
and the sound is completely separate, has to be recorded separately and then synced up.
Exactly. Yeah. So I mean, the logistics is just, it's not necessarily that it's harder or easier. It's just different. You need to have a different setup. So and with the shift to color, I think is the BBC recognizing that Doctor Who is becoming kind of a flagship show. It's got legs, as they say. It'll run and run. And so
as soon as they could see that color television was coming, they started making stuff in color. It was it's like with HD. They started making shows in HD long time before HD TVs were commonplace in homes. Yeah,
and now so we have this production shift, just in kind of the way that the BBC is kind of recognizing the show Doctor Who. They're also made some decisions to just modify the character a little bit in the same way that Patrick Troughton wasn't the same as William Hartnell. He didn't wear the same clothes. He didn't act in the same way. John Pertwee was going to be his own kind of doctor. And this was a time, I think someone drew attention to this. James Bond was big, and the whole action, sort of 70s action hero thing was starting to be developed. And so they wanted John Pertwee to be the action hero doctor, He was kind of famed for being a heartthrob, a good-looking guy, which, I don't know, make your own decision about that. But, he was bringing a different kind of physicality to it, which, Patrick Troughton was a very physical actor. But we've got Doctor Who learning, like, Venusian karate or something like that. He had this kind of space kung fu, which was kind of a cheat, People would kind of launch themselves across the room, and he'd have a stance and then kind of turn to one side and karate chop them on the neck, and then they'd go down. And it's like, well, yeah, I know Venetian kung fu or whatever.
Right.
There's also, he would have kind of gadgets. The sonic screwdriver had already been introduced in the previous storyline with the previous Doctor.
Where it was actually used as a screwdriver?
As a screwdriver, believe it or not. Fun trivia there for you. But this Doctor, he not only kind of had that, which he didn't make so much use of, not as much as they do these days. They seem almost fixated on using that sonic screwdriver, which I think, speaking as a Freudian, that's kind of interesting. But back then, the Doctor, he had a car. At one point, he had a little hovercraft. He was always, jumping into vehicles, throwing people out of vehicles, and whatnot. There was also the famous line got developed to invert the polarity. He was always going around saying that as a way to kind of just let everybody know that this was a gimmicky kind of Doctor Who, in the sense that he liked his gizmos and he was technically minded.
Technobabble type thing.
Yeah, technobabble, which doesn't really make sense, but just serves to kind of you create a technical problem, and then you have a little bit of technobabble to fix it, and somehow the story just ticks along.
Like in Star Trek.
Do they? Sometimes they do. Sometimes you get a very heavy kind of Star Trek episode where you think about it, it's like, well, that doesn't make sense. Like, hard light holograms? Really? That seems like you would use it for something else than what you're using it for if you really had that technology. So now all these things are kind of what has been dialed back lately, or just a shift even, not even dialed back, but it's like, you got to have a Doctor Who that travels in time and travels in space. That's kind of the only reason for having that. Otherwise, what you would get is just an endless line of aliens just successively kind of invading Earth or trying to invade Earth, And as a way to kind of deal with that contrivance, make it a little bit more palatable, they created the concept of UNIT, the United Nations International Task Force, which was like this kind of global organization that if something weird happened on the planet, then you call UNIT and they send a team in to go and sort it out. And the Doctor falls in with this group as a easy way. So something happens, they say, hey, we need to call UNIT. UNIT says, hey, we need to call Doctor Who. And so now Doctor Who's involved in everything. Now, I will say that as the Third Doctor's stories progressed and went on, his TARDIS did get fixed. He did go on kind of time missions and space missions. And interestingly enough, he went on the first alternate parallel dimension, alternate universe adventure in Doctor Who.
Okay.
And that's not... It's common for Star Trek. It's not common for Doctor Who at all. There is basically that one called Inferno, which is fine. And then there weren't... I'm racking my brain to think of any until we got to David Tennant, and you had the crossover with the new Cybermen, the Daleks. So City of Ghosts, was that the episode? So, yeah, it's kind of interesting that they kind of avoided that.
Yeah, well, no, I was going to talk about David Tennant, but we'll get to that in a couple of episodes.
We'll get to that, yeah. So, and with the new Doctor Who, I think this is... I mean, again, use your own judgment and your decision. For me, this is when Doctor Who started getting a little bit campy. His outfit was more flamboyant than practical, whereas with William Hartnell, he had this, the suit tails, kind of morning jacket kind of look with the cane and sometimes a hat. You got the feeling that that's just what he knew. You know, those were the clothes from the era that he gravitated towards. Whereas with John Pertwee, these clothes were not clothes that anybody had worn. You know, they were very kind of it was all very bespoke and, you know, just kind of, yeah, like I say, flamboyant. And again, you know, they wanted to make use of the color television, so they, you know, give him a colorful jacket. Why not?
Yeah.
So you can see the decisions, but then, you know, again, this is, like I say, this is something that later iterations of Doctor Who have kind of come back away from. But, you know, again, you still got, throughout this all, you know, Doctor Who running around fighting Daleks and all that kind of stuff. You've also got a shift in producers. And again, when we were talking last time, I said it's as helpful to think of Doctor Who in terms of producers as it is in terms of actors of Doctor Who.
Yeah, absolutely.
We had Verity Lambert who kicked the entire thing off and kind of got it going. Dick Sherwin was the next kind of big producer. He kept things going. He was more kind of a sci-fi guy from Evidence, or, you know, people told him to be a sci-fi guy, and he delivered a lot of the good sci-fi Doctor Who show elements, which, you know, we still carry on today. Not the Daleks, those had already been introduced, but, you know, Cybermen and Silurians, I think. No, Silurians are coming up. Anyway, he just kind of not instituted a huge bunch of changes, but kept everything on a firm footing. With the third producer to come in, Barry Letts, he was the first producer that people, I think, kind of took note of, and he was very well thought of in the fan community. He died recently through cancer a few years ago. But he did have a book called Doctor Who and Me, which I think is worth a read if you're into that kind of thing. But he, whether these were kind of his ideas or whether it was imposed from him from above, I don't really know. The old producer Dick Sherwin did the first episode of the new Doctor, and then there was a handoff to the next producer for the next episode, which I think is fairly common.
It would be a very different job. It would have been a very different job being a showrunner on Doctor Who back then to what it is now, because now there's so much material, not just in the TV shows, but in the expanded universe, so to speak, to draw on, and they're always sort of, you know, picking out some alien race that was mentioned once in an episode and delving a little bit more into that. So it's kind of helpful to have all that material, but also kind of restrictive to keep things.
Yeah.
I don't know. Do you think it's easier for a showrunner now or harder? Because it's like there's less freedom, but a bit more help. Because, you know,
here's the thing, and again, you know, we brought this up last episode, but the fans are fairly forgiving with Doctor Who, I feel. In comparison to other,
far more so than like Star Trek or something, where
Star Trek or Star Wars
almost has to be real.
Yeah.
You know, to an extent, whereas Doctor Who is
I think it's more resilient in the fact that the fans have proven to be very willing to ignore continuity lapses. If it adds to the general fun and feel of the overall show. And, you know, even Barry Letts kind of introduced things which have just kind of been ignored now, which is fine. Because you're right, it is kind of insupportable, and it'd be interesting to kind of see where the first contradiction, you know, occurred in Doctor Who, the first factual contradiction. Because there's lots of them now. And, you know, you can, in a way, it's just the whole burden of the continuity itself is kind of a release, because you cannot go over that in every single episode. You can't pick up, you know, what we're doing right now in any way, and just kind of, you know, with James Bond, you know, you have to kind of set up that he's this kind of, you know, MI6 guy who's kind of, or MI5, he's kind of, you know, an edgy guy. You have to set up the character each film, you know. And I think, you know, there's an acknowledgement that people, you know, aren't necessarily going to remember James Bond, or this is going to be their first James Bond or something like that. With Doctor Who, because there's so much, you just cannot do it. And Russell T Davies, who kicked it off again with Crystal Eccleston and then saw through David Tennant's run, he put almost no information about continuity with Doctor Who. There is very scant information on who Doctor Who is, which is fine. And, that's kind of how the show started off. You had this old guy who was driving around in a time machine, and they didn't explain it. They didn't explain it for years, almost a decade. So, and I think this is I would like this way of thinking in terms of production and realization to be more common than it is. I don't think people take this lesson in Hollywood, and especially with kind of setting up expanded universes, shared universes, which I think we should talk about at some point soon. The people who do it well, and I'm thinking of Marvel here, just kind of say, well, here it is. We're going to tell a good story. Here it is.
Yeah, I was just thinking Marvel as well, because Marvel have the advantage. Well, not the advantage, but they're the ones who they kind of invented this whole reboot thing, which is happening all the time now, where they bring out Spider-Man, and then they bring out the Ultimate Spider-Man or whatever, or the Amazing Spider-Man, and it's kind of the same story, but it's as if it's almost like they're releasing a first draft, and then they're thinking of ways that they can tweak it or make it more relevant to a modern audience, and then bringing out a new version, reboots the same thing and going into more detail, or changing some facts and things, which I don't know. Like it feels like there's only certain things you can do that with.
I guess.
Whereas, so Doctor Who, it hasn't really done that, but it's just kept going. And
I definitely want to talk about Spider-Man in a later episode, because I mean, you've touched on a few things there, and it's important to realize that Spider-Man was controlled by Sony until the last movie. And I think it started to get, again, with a little insupportable with Spider-Man, is that they kept retelling the origin again and again and again. And they kept telling the same Spider-Man story about Spider-Man has this mentor who he likes, but then they turn out to be evil and he's got to destroy them somehow. They kept going back to that well. But then when Marvel Studios got their hands back on the Spider-Man property, Sony just said, look, we obviously don't know what we're doing. We're not making as much money as we want to make. You guys make a Spider-Man movie and we'll split the money 50-50. That's, I mean, in a nutshell, that's kind of what the deal was. And Marvel said, okay, that's fine. So we'll make our Spider-Man movie the way we think it should be made. And they did, what I think, the same mode of production that, Doctor Who has become accustomed to, which is we'll just jump in, With the new Spider-Man, the Tom Holland Spider-Man, he's been in 3 stories now. He's had his own movie, but he's also been in Civil War, Captain America Civil War, and then the Avengers Infinity War. And not one mention has been made of Uncle Ben. Not once has anyone said in his hearing or on screen, with great power comes great responsibility. And, never have we had any sort of a hint even of origin. We think that something bad may have happened to kind of push him this way, because I think there's one comment he made, I can't put, Aunt May through this, not right now. That's the only hint that we've had of some sort of past, because we all know it. It's been hammered over our heads. And people who don't know it, they don't need to know it. All you need to know is that this is the character. This is what he's doing, and let's tell a good story on top of that.
Okay, but let's talk more about Spider-Man. I think Spider-Man deserves his own episode. Let's bring it back to Doctor Who.
Yeah.
So Doctor Who is a different beast, really, to those kind of things, in the sense that it hasn't. It's always it's not rebooted. It's not sort of gone back on itself. It's not started again. It's always continued.
Yeah.
And I think that's partly because of the way they set up the whole regeneration thing, and so they have sort of been loyal to that, because that was a great idea, that's worth keeping. So they. Yeah, so they're constantly sort of but then it does put them in this problem that they're just drawing one long line, and everything has to kind of, or everything not has to, but it should. But it obviously is very difficult for them to be completely true to themselves.
Well, here's the thing: is I don't want to keep talking about the modern Doctors, but with Stephen Moffat, we got a producer / showrunner. What we would have called a producer, what we now call a showrunner, who was, I think fixated is the right word, predicated is too weak, but he was really intent on jamming as much continuity into the episodes as he could. And I don't know why he thought this was important at all, to tie together, well, we're having this race from here, this race from there, and we're going to reference this guy from back then, because it's not necessary. It's not what the strength of Doctor Who has been proven to be. I think he was trying to be a little bit Russell T Davies, because he was good at kind of tying a season arc together, but with Moffat we just got arc after arc after arc, and build and build and build, and no real kind of delivery or payoff. Plus you got hampered with all this continuity. There was that one with what's her face, I can't even remember his companions, because their characters don't relieve much of an impression, but the school teacher one, Clara, is it Clara?
Oswald.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Who becomes so important to Doctor Who as a character that she goes through the timeline, and she's always helping him behind the scenes. And I remember seeing that montage, and I'm like, it's clever because you're using clips from past Doctors, but this is going to be the first thing that people forget about in the next Doctor, because it's unnecessary, it doesn't fit, and it doesn't add anything.
So anyway, these
are elements which are in the third Doctor as well. Right. There are things which are useless, don't mean anything, and we've just dispensed with them. I think that's the only reason that it's worth talking about that aspect of things.
Yeah.
So if we're going to talk about highlights of the third Doctor, I think there are some good Dalek episodes. There's War of the Daleks. Yeah, let's see. We got some Silurians, which are like the evolved dinosaurs of the past age, which used to live on Earth, but they're not aliens. They're the previous tenants of the planet, essentially. Which again, is another reason for Doctor Who not to time travel or go off planet. And there's that Inferno episode, which again is interesting as being a kind of alternate reality. Doctor One. This is a reality where Britain is a little bit more fascist, which is something that Britain kind of keeps wanting to discuss in its fiction, I think, because it did have a near brush with it a couple of times, not just externally but internally with kind of Mosley and the brown shirts and stuff. But I didn't mean to talk about the third Doctor so much because in a lot of ways he's kind of a stepping stone Doctor to the Doctor that everybody remembers, has come to embody the Doctor who personality so much, and all the current actors I think use him as a touchstone, which is Tom Baker.
Okay, but before you do that, one thing that I've just been looked at, didn't Sarah Jane Smith first appear alongside the third Doctor? Who then had her own spin-off show, which was like a kids show, so she came back. So then she would have been very young, wouldn't she? And she would have been his young, assistant or companion. And then she made a brief appearance, I think, alongside David Tennant, and then when they made this, and then they started the spin-off series.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in the same way that Tom Baker is kind of the touchstone for all the Doctors now.
Yeah.
I think Sarah Jane Smith is the touchstone for the companions.
Right.
She's a very good actress. Really entered into it. Her first, actually, I should have mentioned this. Her first story was the Time Warriors. And that's a very good episode. It's got the first of the. I mean, if we're talking about the aliens, it's got the first Sontaran in it, the kind of the epitomized warrior space race, but it takes place in the Middle Ages, and it's got a couple good guest actors in it as well. But yeah, she was introduced before Tom Baker was, and then she stayed through a good long. Well, not good long, about halfway through Tom Baker's tenure, but she was in a lot of strong episodes because he was such a strong Doctor, and the
show was sort of finding its feet by that point.
I think so. I think it had fallen into a good rhythm, and Barry Letts, was still carrying on, and he had made it, I think, more into the show that we recognize more today, or at least his influence carried on a good way down the line until until the next producer comes up, who we're not going to discuss yet because that's a whole other can of fish. We'll get that into the next one. But then you also got some really good writers. You got Robert Holmes, who did a lot of kind of horror influenced stories, which people talk about Doctor Who being scary. This is the time that they're talking about. Everyone who watches Doctor Who at this time claims to have hidden behind the sofa. I don't think there were that many sofas in the UK to support the claims, but this is what people were talking about. He brought a good kind of horror thing. There was Terrance Dicks, who was a kind of all-rounder who could write a lot of things. He went on to be a kind of script editor, and he was. Terrance Dicks I think is actually probably the man who should be credited with keeping Doctor Who in continuity the most, because he's written a lot of books, not just adaptations, but just original novels of the character, and in a lot of ways kept it alive in the years where Doctor Who wasn't on television. So with those people, Malcolm Hulke as well. He's one of my favorite writers. He did just a few of them, but again, quite good ones. And you had a Doctor who was who was very energetic, very passionate, and there are some scenes. I'm thinking of the Space Pirates, in particular, where he just really goes all out with the emotion. And whereas John Pertwee always seemed to be looking at the camera and just kind of flashing a wink and a smile, Tom Baker was in it. He was the Doctor, and he delighted in promoting the character just outside of the show. He'd show up at hospitals in costume, or he'd spend his lunch breaks signing autographs of the kids and all that kind of thing. So he really gave so much to the character, just in terms of his own life energy. I think he himself should be credited with a huge part of why Doctor Who was so popular at that time. You also got a few. You got a controversy with Mary Whitehouse, who was very conservative personality, kind of like your sort of little gran, with a handbag, who was saying, Doctor Who, this is a children's program. It should not be scary. Children are getting mentally ill by watching this. They're going to turn into axe murderers and all this kind of stuff. And say, well, Mary, which episodes in particular did you find were most offensive? Oh, I haven't watched any of it. I wouldn't. Stay away from all that. That I think only helped to feed the popularity of it, because people want to watch it to make their own decision, of course. Yeah. So at that time, I mean, even though it had a big flash popularity, and the Daleks from the very outset, were very popular. I think it really took a cultural hold on the country, and just instead of just being a fun TV show that you tuned in, this was now what people were talking about all through the week while it was on, and trying to a fan culture I think was developing. The fan magazines were starting, and people were kind of interacting with it in a much more fundamental way in their own lives and all that. And like I say, it would take a long time to go through the great stories. Oh, I should have said Douglas Adams as well wrote a few Doctor Who scripts, and he was script editor for a little while as well. So we talked about Space Pirates. That was one of his. He's got that kind of sparkling dialogue that you expect from Douglas Adams. City of Death is constantly voted as the best, if not one of the best, Doctor Who episodes of all time whenever they take fan polls. So Douglas Adams wrote that one. It takes place a lot in Paris and stuff. It's got the guy from Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, the bad guy, the Irish Donovan. What's his name? Julian Glover. I think it's Julian Glover. As the villain. At one point, he puts on this ridiculous mask, which is great, and it works because the actors sell it. But so you've got some great writing. You've got good, solid acting. You just have the personalities which are just driving the show forward. With it's just firing on all cylinders at that point. Even though now we look back at it and it's very dated, even in terms of pacing and production value, it seems quite dated. I still find a lot of it is really fun to to go back to and watch. You've also got one episode, I think it's just called The Assassin, which is based on the Manchurian Candidate. Doctor Who actually gets brainwashed. He becomes the president of the Time Lords. He gets brainwashed into becoming an assassin, so he tries to kill somebody, and then they try to figure out, well, how did this happen to the Doctor, and how can we stop it? And so they say, well, let's plug him into the Matrix.
Oh, wow.
And it turns out that the Matrix is this big computer, which you lay down on a table, and they plug this thing into your neck. And at one point, now people constantly keep saying, which doesn't ever make sense to me. They say, now, Doctor, if you die in the Matrix, you die in real life. And I say, okay, that's fine. So people have kind of pointed back to this. This is in the mid 70s that this idea of the Matrix as a computer that you enter into to search for answers.
So why has the
in a shared
BBC not
consciousness.
sued the Wachowski brothers for the Matrix?
I know, right? Yeah, and I'm sure because the Wachowskis would just say, "Oh, it's an homage," we were referencing this, and all this kind of stuff. Well, yeah, you also kind of made your careers on it, and it was one of the episodes which I think Mary Whitehouse did cite as being too scary for children, because the Doctor is being pursued by this kind of like the Man in the Black Hat, the Westworld thing. This is relentless, kind of depersonalized humanoid character, and he gets the Doctor and holds him underwater, as to drown him, and then that's the cliffhanger. And this really upset Mary Whitehouse, and she was basically saying, well, this is the last image that children see of their hero, Doctor Who, being held underwater. Essentially, he's being held underwater for an entire week because you don't know how he's going to get out of it.
Yeah.
I think it's a good device, and I you don't have to be Mary Whitehouse to kind of raise the question: should this be something that children see at 6:00 on a Saturday evening? Is this something that should be moved maybe to 9:00? So you're not getting kind of the 8-year-old in the room seeing this, but the 12-year-olds can now see it.
But you know what? I think that's just become part of Doctor Who. Because they've been saying that in the recent series as well, that maybe it's too scary for kids and stuff. So I think it has to, or it works best on the limit of that watershed. What's acceptable for that watershed, and it should continue to push that limit.
It did. I mean, it pushed it at that time, and it set the tone for a lot of other shows, which maybe were not handling it so responsibly. And I would certainly, I would lay money that in every producers meeting for what shows are we going to show this next season for Doctor Who, they have some number of episodes that they want to be the scary ones. And I think that you can go through any season and any modern season of Doctor Who and just say, this is the scary one, this is the scary one, this is the scary one, because you're right, that's become a part of what the show is now. It's fine. I mean, in the same way
that's true with other series. Like they did the same thing with Star Trek. There were like comedy episodes, there were horror episodes, and there were like morally ones.
Which for an anthology is good, and it'll be interesting to see how things kind of develop, because with TV shows now we're getting a homogenization of the actual episodes, just the feel of the show. Like with Daredevil, you don't have the comedy episodes, you don't have the dark episode, anything like that. Maybe you'll get a bottle episode, or just some new way of.
But maybe that's partly as well because of the changing nature of how we watch them. We
completely. The binge culture, and exactly, I think you look at House of Cards as, I think, being the first one that basically mainlined television into people's homes. It was the first TV show that just said, "Here's your season. Watch it, at your own pace." Yeah, and people would watch it, just straight through. 36 hours later, they'd emerge, blinking, pale-faced, and exhausted.
I don't know. I think 24 was
24
like
was.
It was before On Demand and things, but it was the first time. I think 24 was the first show that went really popular in box sets.
I was going to say exactly that, because you're right.
I think you mentioned
House of Cards was
episode,
maybe House of Cards, of course, was Netflix. That was the context. But yeah, I absolutely agree with 24 as being a show where you can put 2 episodes side by side, and in terms of pace and content and production value, it could be the same episodes. And
so it's like TV shows are now becoming like long movies that you watch in chapters.
Which is fine. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. But then, as before, we were talking about, there was the shift between kind of anthology and, which has got its limitations. And that's why we introduced it into our podcast, is because we were talking about Jump the Shark episodes, is that I think it's pretty hard to keep that running. And, Doctor Who has developed, its certain style of keeping that running. And I think, one way is to say, well, here's a horror episode, here's a comedy episode, here's a bottled episode, here's, episode without the Doctor and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Just as a way so you don't have to keep reinventing the wheel every time you sit down to plan your next season of Doctor Who.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just Doctor Who. I mean, every show kind of faces those challenges. And, some people want to keep, making each new season different, and that's fine too. It all depends, and of course, it's not just the creators who are making the most decisions. It's production, it's the TV stations and the people who, the money essentially. Which I mean, say what you will about that, but anyway.
So with Tom Baker then. Yeah. His tenure ended at the start of the 80s. I think 81 I'm looking at here. And that's about... So do you think it's fair to say that by this time... So between... hang on. So between John Pertwee and Tom Baker, they really sort of defined what more Doctor Who, what we would recognise as Doctor Who now, or did they, or at least they defined that middle era, which was then continued by Peter Davison and Sylvester McCoy.
Yeah, I mean, you can basically say that Tom Baker was the middle period, and John Pertwee and Peter Davison were kind of lengthy footnotes. Just because it was that kind of eclipsing still, I think, and even now, there have been way more, Fourth Doctor comics and books than there have been from the other ones.
Okay. Yeah. And so you think so Tom Baker really stands out as one who really defined Doctor Who as we know it.
I think so. I mean, I could be proven wrong. And the thing is that Doctor Who could change again to look more like one of the other Doctors. And I think with actually the Peter Capaldi, there was a conscious effort to try and make the 12th Doctor more like the First Doctor, more like the 7th Doctor, the 6th Doctor, the Colin Baker Doctor, as being someone who is generally unpleasant just because he is kind of so smart, then he's somehow less of a person, less
it's kind of a Sherlock Holmes type character.
Exactly, which I think is lazy on the part of Stephen Moffat, because he was doing Sherlock Holmes at the same time.
Oh, yeah,
and
of
again,
course, yeah.
there's no reason why someone smart should also be someone antisocial. I never got that. And in fact, you go back to you go back to Sherlock Holmes in the Arthur Conan Doyle stories. It's like, he's not a misfit, kind of misanthrope. He's not kind of antisocial. So much of his deductions rest on having such a tight understanding of the human psyche, that he can't be this kind of on the autistic spectrum. They always make a joke of Sherlock, the Benedict Cumberbatch Sherlock, as being someone who's out of touch with humanity. Well, he can't do what he does if he's out of touch with humanity. I'll just say that right now. Anyway, sorry, that's a whole other thing. But if we're going back to the Fourth Doctor, there was again a kind of important handoff of production, which again we'll talk about in the next one, I think again it was the same. It was the same problem that they had kind of with Stephen Moffat, is a producer who is so intent on making his mark on the Doctor, professing this great love for the Doctor, and Yeah, to a real fault of saying, well, we're going to make him different to everyone else, and you're going to like our way better than any other way. So I'm talking about John Nathan Turner, who, yeah, I'm not a huge fan of. I don't agree with a lot of his decisions. Again, we can talk about that more. But he came along.
So he came in towards the end of Tom Baker's tenure, right? Did he go into the Peter Davison one?
He produced the last season of the Tom Baker series. And again, TV companies like to have a little bit of an overlap. I think at that time, as a way to kind of ease the transition, so that not everything was a huge jarring in terms of tone. So you had Jonathan Turner doing the last season of Tom Baker, and then he cast the next two Doctors to come after him. So there was Peter Davison and Colin Baker, who we'll talk a lot more about in our next episode. And at that point, I think, they're a bit, it's starting to get a bit weaker. I think it's not just because of him. I think that also the BBC was saying, well, we've got such a big... Doctor Who has got such a big head of steam behind it.
Yeah, I mean, it would have been 400 or 500 episodes by this point, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, not just in terms of that, but like we were talking about, it's just its cultural presence that, well, we can skip a little bit on the budget and people will forgive us because they'll keep turning in. Whether we spend £800,000 on this episode and £400,000 on this episode, and that can work for a while. You can write a really good cheap episode, but after a while the cracks begin to show, and they did start to show under the Peter Davison episode, which. Peter Davison tenure, which has got some famously bad episodes in it. Even though he's a great actor, he was a good Doctor. And again, we're getting some.
Why did Tom Baker end? Why did he decide to? Or why did he leave? Was he fired, or did he decide it was time?
He decided it was time. He enjoyed it immensely. I think he's still the longest-serving Doctor.
7 years, I think it was. Yeah.
Yeah. Although David Tennant, I think, has gotten. I think David Tennant was longer, but fewer episodes.
Wasn't Sylvester McCoy a long time? Wasn't he the longest? Anyway, I'm sure we'll
there's all sorts of different ways to slice it. Because Paul McGann, the Eighth Doctor, they call him the shortest for the longest. He was in one episode, but if you look at the number of years where he was the only Doctor before the new Doctor was introduced, he was the longest one, but he only had one episode. Which is another reason why I love Doctor Who. You've got all these little kind of peculiars. But so I mean... Tom Baker loved the character immensely, but like every actor, just wants to move on and do new things. And I think, most actors have loved the character of the Doctor and wanted to give more to it than other actors are willing to give to any other part. I think the exception is being Christopher Eccleston, who is the only actor to not come back and revisit the character in any form or mode. But so he did leave, and he passed on the mantle, and it was actually a long time before Tom Baker kind of came back to the fold. Essentially, he wouldn't do any of the audio dramas. He wouldn't make cameos or anything like that because he had a respect for the character, and he didn't want it just to be about him. He wanted it to develop, which is valid completely, and it's a viewpoint that should be respected. But he was still very much loved, and he loved the part. But he didn't leave under a cloud. He wasn't fired or anything like that. But during the nature of the show, after 8 years, you do want to kind of just move on a little bit, and there's always the danger of typecasting, which is always tricky to get away from for actors, and Tom Baker was still a personality in the UK, as you know, but he didn't really kind of have many roles after that because it's hard, I think it's hard to cast someone that people are going to know is Doctor Who essentially.
And a quick thing about typecasting, it's like, for actors who are successful and getting lots of offers, they don't want to get typecast, but for the majority of actors, if being typecast means you consistently get work. Then a lot of actors would love to get typecast.
Entirely. Yeah, it depends on where you are. I think you can see a lot of times young actors are very idealistic, and it's like I'm all about the craft and the the service to the muses and all this kind of stuff, and I shall only pick the roles which I believe in completely. And then after a certain time, it's like, yeah, I'll be a background character in The Office for 11 seasons if it means I can eat, you know? Why not?
Exactly. Yeah.
What's pride going to get you?
It's like, well, who's the second Bond? George Lazenby? George Lazenby? He quit. He only did one movie because he didn't want to only be remembered for doing Bond. Now he's that's the only reason. He's only remembered for only doing one Bond.
for being Bond just once. Yeah. It can be really tricky. And the way that the most successful way I've seen actors do it is that they'll do something immediately afterwards, like anything.
Yes.
Anything they'll do immediately afterwards. You got Elijah Wood, appearing in Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind as a background character, essentially.
Yeah.
Because he wanted to keep working after Lord of the Rings.
Do something different.
And then he would decide he wanted to go into music production. But then you also got, I think David Tennant. He finished Doctor Who and then immediately went on to do a TV adaptation of Hamlet, and then other things as well. Mm-hmm. And I think he's been successful. Just trying to think, probably one of the most successful doctors to leave. Matt Smith has done pretty well. He got onto
but it's a different era now. But Tom Baker though, when you Google him, Doctor Who is the thing that comes up. He's most famous for that. He's done a lot of other stuff. Yeah. He's quite famous. He's definitely got, he's done a lot of voiceover work and things because he's got that very strong voice.
True. Didn't he do Little Britain?
Just
the voiceovers and stuff. Just because you know who he is. Because he was a part of that shared, cultural phenomenon of the Doctor back then, and so people love him because they love Doctor Who, and he's got that distinct way of speaking that you can spot anywhere, which is a hindrance, but then it's also a help depending on what you want, what you as a producer want from this guy you're going to be hiring. So
great.
All the respect for
I think that pretty much
Baker.
Wraps up.
So I could keep talking forever.
Yeah.
But, we'll have to continue this later on.
So as always. Let us know if you've got any thoughts on Tom Baker or John Pertwee as Doctor Who with the hashtag on Twitter with the hashtag FictionHack.
Yep, so we know where to find you. Feel free to correct any information which I may have gotten wrong. But
and let us know who your favorite Doctor is.
Yeah.
If you have a favorite episode, that would be cool to know.
My favorite Doctor is number 6, and we'll say why that is next episode. But I think he gets very little love, Doctor number 6.
Okay, I'm torn. I'm torn between two.
Oh, yeah?
So
Which ones?
We'll get onto that. Well, I'm not going to tell you.
Okay,
we'll
fine.
Get to that.
I want to know. Okay, so where people can also tweet at Ross Lawhead, all one word, and they can also tweet at Colin_Munro.
That's right.
MUNRO.
That's me.
Or just do Fiction Hack hashtag, and we'll find you. We'll talk about the Fiction Hack website. Go to the Fiction Hack website, fiction-hack.com. That'll have all the show notes. So we can't put those up on SoundCloud, but they do go on the website, and I spend a lot of time getting those all fact-checked for you. So if there are any mistakes I catch, or any expanded bits of information, then they'll be there, usually with dates and all that kind of stuff.
Right, so that's where we're going to put our apologies.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's great.
Cool.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
See you next week. Bye. Yeah, entirely. And so, yeah. So, okay, where we got up to? What were we talking about? You
back to
derailed my train of thought. So we got technical stuff, stories. Okay,